All right, so we're picking up in Exodus. I feel like we're still kind of at the beginning here.
Oh, yeah.
Like we started just like a little bit, but this is definitely the beginning of a big section, a big narrative, or part of the narrative of Exodus.
Yep.
Like the most identifying important part of how the Israelites think about themselves that we're gonna land on. We said that last week, but this is what it is. It's the Exodus.
And it's like the Prince of Egypt, hardcore. I mean, we're still in the narrative of the Prince of Egypt. So it's funny. I was talking to my daughter. We were driving yesterday, and I wanted to listen to this again. And I was saying how it's so funny that like when I read this, I think like Charlton Heston, Ten Commandments, like just different parts of that. But she's like, I don't know what that is. I know. I said, that's why I'm saying this. She's like, I think Prince of Egypt. I'm like, well, you would. It's
right.
the
that's
generational
funny.
thing.
We have a Roku device on our TV, so when you turn it on, it's got like all this, the options, Netflix and Amazon and whatever, all your streaming channels. But at the top, it has like suggestions. And just the other day, Charlton Heston's 10 Commandments was on the suggestions. And I'm like, is this streaming somewhere? And so I clicked on it, and they want you to rent it from Amazon for $2.99 or something. But I thought, like,
they know you.
Oh,
You're
yeah.
like, that's cool.
They are
but also,
watching
wait a
everything.
second.
Yeah. This guy's been reading and listening
good.
to Exodus and everything about it.
Yeah.
But then I thought,
no, like, this is a resource you need.
I am going to sit my
movie.
kids down and make them watch this.
Yeah.
Terrible CGI. I'm not sure you could call it CGI.
I don't know.
Back then.
It's pretty classic. I don't
It
know.
is
I feel
classic.
like
Well, my parents
Yeah.
love it.
Yeah.
I mean, it's their generation.
Ten Commandments, Ben-Hur.
Oh, yeah, you got to watch Ben-Hur,
Spartacus,
too.
I don't think I think I did see it when I was really young, but I cannot
With
remember
the chariot
it at
race?
all. That's
Iconic.
all I know. That's all
Okay.
I know.
That's probably all I know, too.
Yeah. I'm
been
like,
her.
is it accurate? Is it helpful? Or would we watch it and be like, oh, that is not what happened?
Yeah.
All right. So we're picking up in the middle of the whole burning bush thing. And
It was an interesting place to stop our reading.
that's what I meant by that. And, he's still kind of got this like grumbling, like, oh, I don't know. It just seems like he questions so much along the way, even later on into what we read here. But
Not unsurprisingly, Abraham has, we'll still see it as we continue through the stories. People are chosen, they're commissioned by God, and they're like, but why me? I can't do it. That actually for me, just right there, is a big takeaway from this week, that God delights in using people who aren't the firstborn always, who aren't, they don't think they're qualified, because his strength is made manifest in our weakness. So that's just another example of that, but it's a pattern that we see.
yeah. I think the other thing that was interesting that as I was reading this, which I've read it before, this time stood out to me, was just that, God ended up using, and maybe there's more significance to this, I don't know, but like what he had, it wasn't like something he had to like give him, like with his staff and even his cloak for those signs. It's like, dude, you're going to use what you just have, the tools you have, kind of like who you are. Like, I'm not going to have to like make you into something, or I'm not going to have to, transform you or gift you in some unique way. It's just, I've already equipped and given you what you need, and you're going to use what you have. So.
Yeah, even when he, later, he's like, but I still can't do it, and God gets annoyed with him. He's like, come on, man. He's like, well, you have a brother who's a really eloquent speaker. Yep. He's like, it's right in front of you. Like, you can utilize him, and I'll provide for both of you.
Yep.
But even just that, whenever I was studying a little bit about what's happening in a couple of these chapters, because we get to some weird stories, I love how God accommodates. He accommodates us personally, and he will use whatever we have for his purposes and his glory. But also he's always doing something deeper than what we realize, because he knows everything that's going to happen. And the staff in the Egyptian culture is part of how Pharaoh was always depicted. So if you just Google a picture of Pharaoh online, you'll see he's holding a staff.
I'm going to do it while you're talking.
And he has a snake on his headdress. Because I'm like, why snake? I thought snakes were bad. Why are we focused on snakes in this section? But for the Egyptians, a staff and snakes were these symbols of royal authority. And so he's about to go to battle with Pharaoh, who's the epitome of all that's wrong with power and authority in the world. And
Yeah.
he's saying, hey, like
Jafar.
that's right. Everyone watch Aladdin. But yeah, like he's Yahweh's about to show, I am the true God, I'm the true king. And so it's what Moses has, and it also has this deep symbolic meaning for Pharaoh and the Egyptians.
Well, I went off on a whole weird tangent about like, I wonder where he found that stick, and he just was looking at it thinking like, oh yeah, this is a cool stick. 'Cause he's a shepherd. He's probably, that's what he had with him when he walking around doing what he's doing. I don't know.
Yeah, his shepherd staff.
Yeah.
Tool of the trade.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But when he found it, or did someone like fashion it for him? I don't know.
I don't know.
And where is it today? I mean, whatever happened to it? You'd think after all the miraculous ways that God used that staff, that would be like an artifact.
Hold on to that?
Yeah, they're like, hey, we should probably keep this.
Yeah, but that is interesting that there's no mention of that ever, which I think is important because that has happened in church history. Oh, find the things that God's power, was used through. But I think that they recognize that it wasn't the staff; it was God working. But it is important to remember because that is part of some church traditions.
Yeah, but they do keep some things, but it's not like a relic. It's more to remember God's power. So like they will keep Aaron's staff for a long time because Aaron's staff later will bud, and we'll get there. But they keep manna, they keep all sorts of things with the Ark of the Covenant.
Dude, that's awesome. So there's another pretty significant thing that I think that it's the first time we hear of it that I think is a dominant theme through the rest of our reading. It's in 21.
Chapter 4.
Chapter 4. And the Lord said to Moses, when you go back to Egypt, see that you do before Pharaoh all the miracles that I have put in your power, but I will harden his heart so that he will not let the people go. And so this theme of like, it just happens a lot where it's like, God hardening his heart or Pharaoh's heart was hardened. Does this mean like it was? I just think a lot of people would have questions about that, or that comes up a lot. That did he not have a choice? Is this like, or is this a God's sovereignty for what he knew what was going to happen? And so,
and is God causing evil? Like, what's going on here?
Yeah. So I don't know if you guys have any thoughts about that.
Rachel has a lot of thoughts.
No, you start.
No, you start.
He's like, I do, but I'm not going to.
I mean, I don't think it has to be crazy. I just think
I think that on one extreme, some people would jump in and say like, oh no, if like God enters Pharaoh's heart and mind and forces him to do these things. And some people think that. It seems as though one of the things that I found helpful is understanding the hardening of Pharaoh's heart as God just strengthening his resolve. Those things are already in his heart. The desire to punish the Israelites and to, continue to act in these ways, that's already in his heart. And the Lord is just strengthening his resolve or accelerating that in his own mind. But I don't think the Lord's putting something new in there for him.
Yeah, I mean, just as far as like how we study the Bible methodology, this is one of those key moments because people sometimes take one verse like that and they build a whole theology around it instead of reading through the whole narrative. And when you read through all of these chapters together, it's just in general very clear that Pharaoh is evil, and he is opposed to Yahweh and the people of God. And so that's clear. It's clear that he has choice. I mean, he's said over and over, like, do this thing, and Pharaoh would not do it. But also, just for context, there are like a few different words that are used for harden in this section.
Oh, yeah, that's good.
And one of them means heavy. And for Egyptian context, if you have a heavy heart, it's a guilty heart. So you can, again, if you want to Google the Book of the Dead for Egyptians, you'll see these pictures of Pharaoh's hearts being weighed after they die. And if their heart is heavier than a feather, then they're guilty. They're guilty of injustice. And so one of these words for hardened that's used here is to be guilty, heavy, which means guilty. Every time it says Pharaoh hardened his own heart, it's that word, which is heavy. So Pharaoh has a guilty heart. And whenever God eventually starts to harden his heart, which it's progressive, God will only harden his heart later, it's resolute. So Pharaoh himself is guilty, and then God just makes his actions resolute so that his power and his authority can be seen.
Yeah. I think that's good. All right, so then right after that, we have this little. It's almost like not a weird interruption, but there's like
It's definitely a weird interruption.
okay.
Oh, that.
And I know somebody on the Facebook page was kind of had a question about this, but yeah, I mean, I think it's weird. It's almost like I'm thinking of Moses, who's writing this, almost like tries to like, I don't want to have to mention it, but I got to say something, so we're not going to go into great detail, because it says, at a lodging place on the way, the Lord met him and sought to put him to death. Then it's like, whoa, wait,
yeah. Where did that come
Where
from?
did that come
Yeah.
from?
Yeah.
What's going on? What happened? There's got to be more to the story, and you get a little bit more context with. I mean, I don't know. Maybe is it because Moses wasn't obedient? And I saw you respond. I didn't read it because I figured I wanted to save it for the podcast. So I don't know if you completely answered it, and you're like, we don't need to talk
She
about it.
did a great
here.
job.
Well, I think there's two things going on here.
Okay.
I think one is that there's parallels with a lot of whenever God's commissioning people and they're traveling back into either the promised land or to the people. So you can think about what we talked about with Jacob wrestling with God, right? There's this moment whenever their identity and their allegiance has to be solidified before they can be used for this salvation story. So that's part of it, because remember, Moses doesn't really know who he is. I mean, he's a Hebrew baby that was saved and brought up in the Pharaoh's household. But I mean, he didn't know what to do to protect the Hebrews. And when he meets his wife, they say, this was an Egyptian. So who is he? So there's this moment when he's going, whenever he has to solidify that I am one of the descendants of Abraham. That is who my people is. So it's this like identifying moment before he's actually goes on what God's called him to. But it also, Moses' stories parallels the Israelite story in this. So he's saved out of the reeds, and we'll see that the Red Sea is actually the sea of the reeds. So a lot of what happens with Moses, we see happen with Israel. So it's a foreshadowing what's about to happen. And so it is that he's going to be saved through, the promises of Yahweh, through this like blood covenant. So it sort of parallels what happens with them. But really, it's the firstborn son. It's been warned about that. He's already been warned about that. Egyptians would have been circumcised, probably. His son might not have been, because they were not part of the covenant people. They were Midianites, and so his sons might not have been circumcised. And so she really quickly circumcises her son and then touches Moses' feet, which can be euphemism for something else. In the Bible, it is sometimes. So she's saying to God, hey, no, we're a part of the covenant with you. So bridegroom just means a male relative. And so you are our male relative by blood. So we're a part of your covenant through circumcision. So it's really just this, it sounds so weird, but it's this moment whenever Moses is like, I am a part of the covenant people, and that means that I'm protected from the firstborn dying.
Yeah.
Is that helpful?
Yeah, I think that's good. Hopefully that answers it for everybody else.
I mean, that's a shortened version, but...
Okay, let's hop in. We were in 4 for a long time. And maybe there's going to be some themes, so you're going to have to stop me on stuff, because I might feel like I'm blowing through some of these things. But I think for me, at the end in 5, we get the thing where Pharaoh initially is like, "Oh, it seems like they don't have enough to do if they want to go out and worship their God. Mm-hmm. So let's give them more work to do. Let's stop giving them the straw. They got to make bricks themselves."
More oppression.
Yeah, more oppression. One thing I guess I was thinking through is this idea of like building Pharaoh's kingdom, like this earthly kingdom with the bricks, versus like God's kingdom, and just getting this glimpse of like where they talk about the hosts, God's hosts, the hosts of Pharaoh, like that. There's like this. It is more of like this cosmic kind of thing at play. It's not just Moses versus Pharaoh.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And something that struck me in reading this week was, I've never thought about it this way, God's relationship with Moses. Moses is a unique character, a unique figure throughout the Old Testament, because God does seem to work through him differently than he does anybody else. Moses seems to have a lot of influence and authority and power even, but also he speaks to God in ways maybe others don't. and the Old Testament. And so what struck me, though, because we said there's a few ways we're going to approach the scriptures as we read. And you go all the way back to the very beginning, and God's plan for humanity was partnership. That what God really wanted was for his relationship with humans to be such that others flourished and that injustices were made right and all of these things. And when you look at Moses, I wonder if this isn't a picture of what could be when humans are fully partnered with God. When God really gives some of his authority, some of his power to a human to make a difference, and what it would look like for a human to fully live into that. And so there's this back and forth where Moses is learning to live into that, and when there's a problem with Pharaoh, he goes back to Yahweh and he's like, okay, there's this problem, and the Lord gives him authority to then respond and carry out these plagues. Obviously, it's God's hand, but I don't know, just this unique partnership that I never really thought about with Moses before as I've read through.
Yeah. That's what I had underlined here at the end of 5, where he's like, "Oh Lord, why have you done evil? Like, why did you even ever send me?
Right.
Like, why did you do this?"
Yeah.
So much honesty.
Yeah.
Yeah.
In his conversations. And also, I was thinking the same thing, but also how it's Moses who's commissioned, but so clear that he could not do this by himself.
For sure.
Yeah.
I mean, he himself needs a mediator, and he himself needs people who are redeeming him in all these places. We just saw that in the weird little story, but his wife is the one who acts.
Yeah.
Because she realizes what's happening, and he needs Aaron to help him along, and we'll see that over and over again. And it's like he is commissioned in this unique partnership, but he cannot do it alone.
Yeah.
Also, what I found myself doing because of, I think, our conversation in the last episode, just the difference when the Lord gives his name, Yahweh, I've just tried to read I'm trying to discipline myself to read this entire story every time it's Lord
it's
in all
Yahweh.
caps, to say Yahweh.
Yeah.
And then every time it says God, to say Elohim. It's interesting, the dynamic. What happens in my mind is I'm tracking with the story. The Elohim versus Yahweh. And even when Pharaoh goes back and forth between those two, the Elohim versus, your Elohim versus Yahweh is
Who's
your God.
Yahweh?
It's an interesting
Yahweh?
interplay with the way the words are. Because for us, there is only one God when we read it. We say God, we mean Lord, we mean Yahweh, we mean the one. But that's not the world they lived in. There were lots of gods in their world.
All right, let's scoot on here to 6, where God kind of sets forth hey, here's what's going to happen. Moses again is dude, nobody's listening to me. How are they going to listen to me? If the people don't listen to me. And that was probably one. Maybe people have questions. Says I am of uncircumcised lips. We're like, what the heck?
I knew. I was like, Ted is going to ask what uncircumcised lips mean.
So what did you what's the answer?
What do you think? Or what have you learned?
Because I think it's ambiguous. It doesn't seem like it's overtly clear. Maybe it was because he couldn't talk very well. Maybe it was because of the shame of what had happened in the story we just read about.
He's like, it's not working. Clearly, I'm not worthy. I think it is an unworthiness. And whether it's a physical impediment or he really doesn't believe he's the right person.
Yeah.
I mean, he says over and over, why me? Why'd you send me? What am I doing here? But that is the idea, is because if you're circumcised, you're worthy. You're in. And he's saying, I'm not worthy of this. I'm not clean enough. I'm not purified enough. I'm not up to the task.
Maybe he's feeling bad that he murdered somebody still. He's feeling some guilt about that.
Probably all of that.
Yeah. He just feels unqualified.
Yeah.
I mean, really, another takeaway for me from this week really is, how often do we do that? God delights in doing that. How many times has God called us to do something where we're like, why me, not me?
Yeah.
Not
Put
me.
it down to the simplest level where you feel like you're supposed to say something to someone. I'm supposed to invite them to church or offer some words of kindness or step in and be generous in this way. And we argue with ourselves and maybe even with the Lord, not me.
Yeah. I feel bad.
It's
I feel like
it's convicting. It's convicting.
Yeah.
It was to me too. I'm like, how I mean, how sad. Because you're like, come on, Moses, God's with you. He goes before you. He's calling you to do this thing, participate. And I'm like, oh, I definitely do this. I definitely say, but not me.
Yeah. Yeah, I guess this is where the other part where I got in 7:20 or 6:26, where it's like, these are Aaron and Moses, whom Lord said, because we get through the genealogy, which I'm assuming is just so that everybody knows this is
Yep.
who these people are. But he said, bring out the people of Israel from the land of Egypt by their hosts. So you start, I mean, is that just by their hosts, like the Egyptians who were hosting them, or is that some cosmic, the host? Because then you hear later on about, in 7, then I will lay my hand on Egypt and bring out my hosts.
I mean, the word
it's-
host is going to be used a lot. Like,
Yeah, it's my host, their host. Like, we got these hosts that are at play. So I don't know. Maybe I need to do a better job looking
trying to look
up.
something up on that.
Again, we see more of Pharaoh's heart being hardened, which, again, we're going to see a ton of. But, yeah, this is 7 is where he and Aaron go the first time.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's another question people have. I made you like God to Pharaoh and your brother Aaron as your prophet. Just to be super clear about that, that just means, a prophet speaks for God. It's God's words through a prophet's mouth. Thus saith the Lord. It's a very unique position and responsibility, and he's just saying Aaron will just be like that for you. So it'll be your words, but Aaron will speak them.
Yeah.
Doesn't mean anything more than that.
What about people who would maybe ask, like, how did Moses have the ability to be able to get an audience almost like at will with Pharaoh? What do you think? I mean, we don't really know. It doesn't explain that, but just seemed like maybe Pharaoh was always taking an audience with whoever wanted to talk to him. That doesn't seem very likely.
Right.
Especially as, like, at that time, as big of a position, as much authority and he had over the known.
He did meet with the Israelites beforehand, and he told them what was going on and showed them signs. And so that might be part of it. I mean, even think about how Jesus, he was showing signs. That's like a display of authority that people have to recognize. I don't know, though.
It seems likely that Pharaoh and Moses knew each other, though. Remember, Moses grew up in the Pharaoh's house. This is a different Pharaoh than when Moses was a baby.
Yeah.
And they weren't trying to kill him anymore, but yes.
But I mean, it was typically a lineage thing and a family. We don't have any specific information about was it the same family, but likely they knew each other.
Yeah. Awesome.
Maybe I shouldn't say likely. It's possible.
It's possible.
It's possible they knew each other.
It's possible.
Yeah.
Es muy posible. Okay. All right. So then we kind of get into the like.
Here come the plagues.
Yeah, here they come. Which, is there anything worth like bigger picture before we start like just whipping through them that's helpful?
Rachel's got some stuff.
Oh, no, I was trying to see where all it says. I think part of this is not about that. Sorry, not about plagues. But something that's important to remember is whenever he asks for the people to be let go, he says so that they can worship. And I just think that's an important thing to remember throughout this, that there's a purpose to the deliverance, right? Let them go so that they can worship me. Moses says, let us go so that we can have a festival and worship God. That's just an important concept to keep in mind. It's not freedom for freedom's sake. It's freedom so that they can worship God. And the plagues also have a specific purpose.
It's funny when you said that and I first read it, the first time I'm thinking like, he's not really just asking to go do this. He's like saying like, no, let him go like for forever. Not like, hey, just give us a weekend pass so we can go like hike out into the wilderness and offer sacrifices and stuff.
But Pharaoh still, he's like, he's like, well, you can, he always like makes it less. I mean, he's not willing to do anything.
Yeah.
I think it shows the resoluteness of Pharaoh, but just the complete hardness of his heart. Like, no, I won't let you even go for a weekend to worship this God. And that doesn't even make sense in their context. Because like Lance is saying, they believed in lots of gods. Yeah. And so you don't want a God angry with you. Clearly they have a different God. You should let them worship for a weekend. And Pharaoh's still like, no.
And Pharaoh didn't want him to leave. He's trying to build his kingdom. He's
Yeah.
trying to build his thing, and these are the people that are helping make that happen.
Right.
So,
The people that he and his people have oppressed.
yeah,
And I imagine, I kind of read this and think, in Pharaoh's mind, maybe it's you give him an inch, they'll take a mile.
Yep.
He doesn't want to relent at all.
yeah,
It is this, I mean, pharaohs were considered gods. They were considered the most powerful god. And so it is, like you're saying, this cosmic battle that's happening, which is why he says, I'm going to do this so everyone will know who I am.
Yeah.
And when Pharaoh says, who is Yahweh? I mean, it is this battle between gods. That makes no sense, but that's also the story of the Bible. You know,
Yeah.
humans trying to be their own gods. That's what this looks like.
Yeah. And gods, again, Pharaoh was considered Elohim. If we just go back to, if Yahweh is over all the Elohim, Pharaoh's considered one of them. And back when it says that God said to Moses, you will be like an Elohim and your brother will be like a prophet. Like he's elevating Moses to the place that Pharaoh is elevated in that culture. He's saying you will be peers and equals.
yeah. Phew. When I think of that, I'm like, man, I didn't read it like that, so I feel like, oh, I missed it. So I should start doing that. Try and discipline myself, like you said. Read God's as Elohim.
Yeah, Elohim
Lord
and
is
Yahweh.
Yahweh.
And it's interesting, just the different, like the details that pop out
Yep.
in those moments.
Okay, you ready to hop into the plagues?
Yeah.
Okay. Anything that's helpful as an overview of plagues in general? Like, are these mirroring something? Are these foreshadowing something? Are they just really just individual miracles, or
Probably all of
works
those things.
Okay.
Yeah,
Yes.
a lot of
yes,
things.
yes,
But
yes.
even I'll just because I just said, I mean, so that you will know that I am Yahweh, who Yahweh is. He says that 7 times in the 10 plagues. 7 times he says that, which we talk about the number 7 a lot. That's completeness, and so the fact that that's said 7 times during these plagues is very, very important. That's how you know that's what's happening here. It's judgment, but it's also everyone needs to know, and we'll see later on, like in Scripture and during the conquest, that other nations do hear about this. They say, oh, we heard about what Yahweh did, and we are terrified of y'all. How can I help you? So there is a bigger purpose than just judgment going on.
Yeah.
I think that's good to remember because this is a lot.
Okay, so first plague,
Water to blood.
Water into blood. I don't necessarily know the significance of that, but what was interesting is even right away how we start to see that even Pharaoh's like, oh, well, dude, that's nothing. That's not a miracle. I got these guys that can do that. And so you got these other magicians, whatever, who are able to emulate or do something that is the equivalent. So it's like, you guys are just making stuff up. Like, this isn't.
Yeah, it's again like this power, like I'm a god too. I got it.
Yeah.
But it does, if you think about how does this start? The beginning of the story was that Pharaoh was throwing the firstborn, all the male children, into the Nile. He was killing God's people in the Nile. So there's this parallel between what Pharaoh did and what God is saying, hey, it's this foreshadowing even of the 10th plague, but it's this, an eye for an eye kind of judgment that's going on.
I guess I remember like with the whole staff and the throwing it down and the serpents, and they did that, but then like his serpent ate the other
That's
ones.
right.
That was about, we skipped over that. Sorry.
Well, that's also about the royal authority.
Yeah.
Like those things both symbolize royal authority. And Yahweh saying it's not even
but they
a
didn't
contest.
get that. He just saw it as like, oh, okay, but my people.
He
can do
did
the
get
same
it.
thing.
We don't get it when we read it, but he knew.
You think Pharaoh knew?
Yes, because they were emblems of royal power. I mean, any image you see, staff, snakes.
Yeah, but when the staff, when Aaron's staff turned into a snake, or Moses, I don't know. He had Moses' staff at this point, right? Or is this Aaron's staff?
I don't know.
forget where it is.
I don't know.
So he threw it down, then they threw theirs down, and then
his ate theirs.
His ate
Yeah.
theirs. You think he got the symbolism of like this?
I do.
Okay.
This God has authority over your God.
Yeah.
Yes.
But he didn't see it that way. It didn't seem like.
Well, I think that we're supposed to be thinking, Pharaoh, what is wrong with you?
Yeah.
Because what he does over and over doesn't make sense even in their cultural context.
Yeah. So it's almost like blasphemy. That like he knows, he recognizes, but he still like ignores.
That's how guilty and resolute
Yeah.
his heart is. Yeah.
yeah. Wow.
And again, we're in our reading plan. We don't go all the way through all 5 of Moses' books. But if you were to keep reading, you'll get to this strange story in Numbers where the people have rebelled, snakes are biting people, and so Moses makes a bronze serpent and lifts it up. Like, there's so much symbolism here. You read that, and it seems so weird that Moses would hold up a bronze serpent, and people look at it and they'd be saved from the venom that's in their veins. But again, there's like ancient, what's the word I'm looking for? Like symbols at play for
Yeah.
us. So
Yeah.
Yeah, that's
Yeah.
crazy.
It's really like you were asking about the plagues. Is it looking backwards or forwards? Yes. There's allusions to the past. There's hope for the future. There's foreshadowing for what's to come for the people and in Jesus.
Yeah. So I mean, you see at the end of 7 there where like they have to start digging along the Nile 'cause they can't drink the water from it, and just like how much of a life source that was, and for how many days. Like, I mean, think about like a hurricane. You don't have water. It's like, dude, you're in trouble.
Yeah.
So-
Yeah, we read
That's
these
the
really
first thing.
fast.
Yeah.
But they didn't all happen that
Yeah,
quickly.
right.
This
Yeah.
was
Yeah, I mean, there was days enough that people are like, "Oh, we got to figure out. We need some water."
yeah.
Okay, Pharaoh's heart was hardened. And then the second plague. Sorry, that was a lot of. Sorry about that. It's like a lot of spit all of a sudden. I was like, all right, the second plague of frogs, where, I mean, yeah, I don't know how much it is to like get into each one of these, but
So one of the big picture theories, or understandings of what's going on is that this is a decreation event. And so you can really see a lot of these as we talked about how this is foundation for the people's identity and even our identity. But Genesis is sort of foundational for the God's purposes and plans for humanity. And this is the opposite of God's purposes for humanity. Really, like Pharaoh in Egypt is the extremity of this is what it means to be opposed to God, which is why this is so intense. And it should feel intense, but it's this decreation story that's happening in the plagues. And so the frogs he begins in creation by separating the land from the water, and the frogs are these amphibians that cover the land. And so you start to see these themes of decreation happen.
so there's a ton of frogs.
Ton of frogs.
Ton of
gross.
frogs covering
And
the
it's
land.
like,
Yep.
this is not good. Then there's like gnats, which if you've ever been like backpacking, hiking
Yeah.
out in the woods or something.
But it's like dust of the earth too.
Yeah.
So as far as creation goes, so if we're created from dust, right? We have life through dust, and he's saying no. Now dust is covering the land and gnats. So instead of like life, it's like death covering the
Yeah.
land. The absence of life.
Yeah. And then if the gnats weren't bad enough,
And then flies.
then
Flies.
flies. And that's what I'm saying, man.
Yeah.
Flies are, yeah. So I guess it is. It's just it's slowly but surely.
It's like this is what it looks like to not be under the rule and blessing of God. This
Yeah.
is what it's like to be opposed to what God wants for all of us. It's chaos and death.
Yep.
Yeah, think back to the creation story. Humans are the last ones on the scene, and God says, you will rule over all of this and have dominion over it. And so you will push your authority onto it. Well, now the creation is pushing its authority, creeping back into humanity, and humans can't do anything about it.
And then the fifth plague, which is this the first one where he starts delineating between like, hey, the
Egyptians versus the Israelites experiencing the
Israelites.
plagues.
Yeah. I don't know. Maybe it has.
Not one of the livestock of Israel was dead.
Yeah. So he's now not just saying I have authority, but I really can pick and choose, and these are my people.
Yeah, and I'm going to. So remember, one of our themes that we've seen, with Abraham, like I'm going to bless you, and then all the nations will be blessed through you. I will bless those who bless you. I will curse those who curse you. We're still in that story,
Yeah.
and so he's trying to show them, hey, if you're a part of my people, then you're going to be blessed too. This is the way to be my people. But if you don't, then you're going to be cursed. Because we'll see, like they can become a part of the Israelites if they want to be. It's not just ethnicity. They can become a part if they are aligned with Yahweh.
So we get some boils.
It just gets worse and worse,
Yeah.
doesn't it?
And then hail. And I guess as you're saying this, like, and now I'm starting to see like the destruction that these would cause.
Yeah.
It really is like wiping the slate clean.
Yeah, it's
Yeah.
opposed to creation itself. It's opposed to everything that the Egyptians held dear, all the power and authority that they had with Pharaoh and all their gods. I mean, he says, I'm going to judge Pharaoh and the gods of Egypt. So this is all of those things at the same time.
Yeah.
But it is also this cosmic story because Pharaoh doesn't even have a name. Remember, Lance talked about that. This is just Pharaoh. He's the second Pharaoh. He's just the most extreme example of a power that's aligned with evil, with what's opposed to God's plan and person.
So then we get to 10 here, the last chapter of our reading this week, and this, that's why I had to underline there at the beginning in verse 2, where you really get this idea of like he's again reiterating the reasons why he's doing this, and so that people will know how I have dealt harshly with the Egyptians, and what signs I have done among them, that you may know that I am Yahweh.
Mm-hmm.
So
Yeah. When I read this, I think this is the first time I've read this since I watched on Netflix. There's some documentaries that, like Earth documentary series that came from the BBC, and they have in one of the episodes, they show a swarm of locusts, like one of these, every few decades, these like massive
Oh,
swarms.
I've seen that. I know what you're talking about. And I was like, this is crazy.
I know. So, I mean,
Oh,
I watched
yeah.
that, I don't know, last year sometime. And then now I've read this and I'm thinking back on that. Have you seen?
no, but
anything?
I feel like I've driven through.
It's like a nature show. Yeah.
Yeah.
Patches where there's a lot of like grasshopper
Yeah.
locust type things, and you're like,
It's
dude,
wild.
that's
No.
wild.
Yeah.
But what I can imagine that being.
So this
would
one,
be
they said
terrifying.
Yes.
it's the swarm is over 1 kilometer long.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh.
And it like is moving across the plains and just eating.
It's
Everything.
all
everything.
gone.
There's
It's gone.
Yeah.
It's-
When they go on, it's just stubble. The grass is gone. They've
I remember
eaten
watching it being like,
everything.
everyone should have to watch this
That's
if,
right.
if they're like a Christian, so they understand
The
like,
destruction that
Yes,
comes-
and
yeah.
that this is real.
So
Yeah.
I Googled a picture.
Yeah, I cannot imagine being.
See that
would,
guy
like,
in there? And
freak
so what
me
they do
out.
is they're like, it shows in the one on Netflix, kids that are like chasing them away because they're eating all their food. They're eating the crops. And so kids are just running around in the middle of this giant swarm with sticks swatting locusts.
Yeah.
Yeah, this is just destroying all the abundance and provision that God gives us in creation too. Here's everything you have to eat and to work, and the locusts are just taking it all away.
Yeah, I mean, this is really the scraping almost of the land. this
Before you get
last
to-
plague, yeah.
After the hail has
Darkness and
destroyed
death.
things
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
the livestock have died and all that. Yeah.
Yeah. Which then, like you said, brings us to
Darkness.
the ninth plague, darkness, which is we're back at it's been deconstructed.
Before let there be
Yes,
light.
Yeah.
Right. Also, just a part of like understanding, like you said, there's this specific battle going on, but then there's this cosmic battle going on, and it says the Lord, stretch out your hand, and then we'll see over and over, like with His mighty hand and His outstretched arm. Pharaohs for 3,000 years, that's how they were depicted in images, with a mighty hand that's going to strike and an outstretched arm. And so this is God saying over and over, and then the Israelites saying over and over, looking backwards, no, Yahweh is the one with a mighty hand who can strike and an outstretched arm. So all the references are, no, it is Yahweh. Yahweh is king, no one else.
Yeah. I mean, he's definitely established himself here clearly with his ability to, not just do miracles, but just have control in a way that seems greater than any
Yeah.
of the other gods that may be enabling some of the other things we're
Yeah,
seeing.
he's using their references to show them, no, I'm actually not just more powerful, I'm the creator God, because I'll decreate
Yeah.
in your land.
So anything as we wrap up, I'm just thinking like some of the questions. Yes, like where do we see where does this fall in the greater story? Do any of these things, are they pointing to Jesus, or how might this be impacting or influencing us as we try and
The way we live.
reach out?
Yeah. I mean, fresh for me is so last night we at church on Wednesday had the start of our series that we're in on the Apostles' Creed, and it talked. The point in the sermon was about how the Almighty God is the creator of heaven and earth,
Yep.
right? And he's also Father, but he is infinitely powerful and intimately personal. And so that's fresh of mind for me this morning as we're recording this, because this is what we just did last night. But yeah, you talk about his power on display through the plagues and through this decreation. He is not to be messed with.
Yeah.
And there is something in me when I think about like how should I live differently that needs to be reminded not to be flippant with this God, not to be flippant with his call on how I'm supposed to live and what I'm supposed to do and what he wants from me, because he is powerful. And that's not a threatening thing, because I know him also to be intimately personal. And so to hold those two things, like, all right, that should change. That shouldn't just be something that I know. It should be something that causes me to live like humbly before his power, but with confidence that he is personal and loving and wants me to know him and walk in his statutes.
Yeah.
And just as we're reading this, I mean, just like if you think back to Revelation, when we talked about, the wrath of God poured out through the bowls and the trumpets, and if you were listening last year, we talked about how they all were hearkening back to these plagues. And so just a reminder that this really is this foundational story. And so they tell it over and over and over for Israel. But then it's also part of our story too. And so right now we're ending this with this is the Almighty God, and then we'll get to what does that mean for us. But it's this personal, merciful, gracious God. This is always the story, and we just see it played out over and over. So you have to think about what does that mean for us.
Yeah. I think for me, I think back to like the beginning where we talked about just even like Moses, who he was, this unlikely, like probably a pretty relatable, albeit some weird upbringing. I mean, that's not super normal, but just even the idea of, finding yourself in the presence of God and like him telling you like, hey, you should go do this. And you're like witnessing this like bush that's like on fire, but it's not burning. And then to be so questioning and not just be like, okay, yes, I got it. But to have, I think that's just super relatable, because I think you just start to think about all the times where, again, you feel led to do things. You feel like God's calling you to do something. It's like, but why me? Really? I'm not this, I'm not that. And just how ultimately got to keep saying yes, and God makes a way.
Yeah,
So,
but again, his desire is partnership with us.
yeah.
Not to be distant, but to be personal. And now a word we use around here is vocation. He gives us something to do. And it's not to lead the plagues and all of that, but it is to walk across the office and share hope and kindness and Jesus with someone, and many more things.
You can subscribe to receive additional resources to help you study the story of Scripture at clearcreekresources.org. We'll see you next week.